The colony of Arendor 7 lay on the edge of the galaxy, far from the bright stars of human civilization. It was a harsh planet, winds that could tear skin from bone, jagged rocks that pierced even armored boots, and nights so cold that the twin suns' warmth barely mattered. When the first humans arrived, they had dreamed of peace. They imagined raising families, building homes, and mining the rare crystals that pulsed beneath the planet's surface. These crystals were valuable, more valuable than anything back on Earth, and that promise had brought them here. But now, hope was fading. Supplies ran low, machines failed one after another, and the colony's communication system had gone silent for weeks. Commander Alara Voss stood alone in the control room, her fingers hovering over the console. Her eyes were dry, but her heart felt raw. She had fought storms, disease, and even the planet's smaller predators, but the creatures that had started hunting humans were unlike anything she had faced. Towering, relentless, and impossibly fast, they tore through walls, machines, and even the bravest colonists. Alara stared at the blinking light of the emergency transmitter. She had tried everything: messages to nearby colonies, automated distress calls, even sending drones into space, but nothing had worked. Silence returned every time, as if the universe had turned its back on them. Her hand shook. "We can't survive this," she whispered. Her voice was small, but it carried the weight of every life in the colony. Mothers, fathers, children, all of them depended on her. And if she didn't act, they would all die here, alone on a planet that didn't want them. With a deep breath, Alara keyed the emergency transmission. The console blinked, sending out a pulse into the infinite dark. "SOS," she typed. "Arendor 7, colony in danger. Need immediate assistance. Native predators overwhelming. Humans at risk of extinction. Please respond." The message shot into the stars. For a moment, the control room was quiet except for the hum of failing machinery. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She imagined someone somewhere seeing the signal. Maybe a nearby colony, maybe a ship passing through the system. Maybe someone who didn't even know humanity existed yet. Hours passed. The wind howled outside, rattling the walls of the colony like a living thing. Alara moved from window to window, scanning the horizon. Shadows shifted among the rocks. The predators were out there, waiting, watching. Their eyes glowed in the dark, faint but terrifying. Every step they took was deliberate, every movement a promise of death. Her thoughts went to her people. Tessa, the little girl who loved to laugh even when the nights were freezing. Joran, the engineer who fixed the machines that kept them alive. Raya, the farmer who had once told Alara that the soil of Arendor 7 had a life of its own. They all looked to her, trusted her, and she could not fail them, not when the predators were coming closer every day. Alara's mind wandered to the stories she had heard about the stars beyond the rim. Civilizations that had mastered space travel, planets teeming with life, species that had survived in ways humans could only dream of. She had always wondered if anyone out there would hear a simple SOS. Now, with her colony on the brink, she had no choice but to hope. She touched the console again, feeling the cold metal beneath her fingers. "Please," she whispered, "someone answer." Outside, the wind carried distant roars and the sounds of things breaking. A farm shed collapsed and a child's cry echoed through the colony. Alara ran toward it, heart hammering, only to find a group of colonists huddled behind broken walls. She held them close, her voice steady even though her heart trembled. "It's going to be okay. We have to wait. Someone will come." Night stretched on, longer and darker than any she had known, and then far above the clouds a faint light appeared. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it moved with purpose, cutting through the black. Alara's breath caught. Could it be a ship? Could it be someone answering the SOS? She ran outside, the wind tearing at her cloak, the cold biting her cheeks. Around her, colonists began to notice the light too, pointing and gasping. For the first time in weeks, something like hope flickered in their eyes. And then, as the light grew brighter, something impossible happened. The stars themselves seemed to shift. It wasn't just a ship. It was life coming from the darkness, drawn to the colony by their desperate call. Alara didn't know who or what they were. She didn't know if they were friend or foe, but for the first time she realized that the universe had heard them. Somewhere out there beyond the endless void, something had answered, and whatever it was coming for them. Alara's lips curved into a small, trembling smile. "Hold on," she whispered to herself, to the colony, to the stars. Help is coming! We're not alone anymore. The wind howled. The shadows shifted and the blinking console cast a soft light over the barren colony. Somewhere in the infinite darkness, a force had noticed the human cry. And soon, the Deathworlders would arrive. The sky above Arendor 7 burned red before the first ships even landed. At first, the colonists thought it was another storm. But this was no ordinary storm. The clouds split apart, revealing enormous shadows that glided silently through the upper atmosphere. Their hulls were jagged, etched with scars like battle trophies, and they shimmered with strange alien energy. Commander Alara Voss felt her heart pound faster than it had in weeks. She had imagined rescuers, ships from human colonies or distant allies, but these were not human. They were something else, something terrifying, magnificent, and alive in a way she could barely comprehend. The Deathworlders had arrived. They descended slowly, their massive forms blocking out the twin suns. Every colonist froze, staring as the alien ships touched the ground with a rumble that shook the planet's crust. Dust, dirt, and fragments of rock spiraled into the air. The very land seemed to shiver beneath their presence. And then they emerged. From the hulls stepped creatures that seemed sculpted from nightmares and perfection alike. Towering, muscular, armored in thick, dark exoskeletons that glimmered like obsidian, they moved with precision and purpose. Every step made the ground tremble. Claws, blades, and appendages that humans could barely name glinted in the strange light. Their eyes glowed like molten steel, studying every human with intelligence and curiosity that was both frightening and fascinating. Colonists screamed and scattered, ducking behind walls, rocks, and ruined buildings. Farmers who had never fired a weapon gripped rifles with shaking hands. Children hid under crates, eyes wide with terror. But Alara stood at the center of the control yard, her voice strong despite the pounding fear in her chest. "Stay calm," she shouted. "Do not provoke them. Observe." Wait, the Deathworlders paused. Their eyes swept over the colony, scanning buildings, walls, and trembling humans. Then, instead of attacking, they observed. The colonists could feel the weight of their gaze, as if the aliens were measuring the value of every single life. And then, almost imperceptibly, the lead Deathworlder lowered one of its massive, clawed hands. It did not strike. It was a gesture, deliberate and careful. Some colonists gasped. Alara felt a flicker of hope. These beings were responding, not with violence, but with recognition. Recognition of what? She wondered. For hours, the Deathworlders moved through the colony. They did not destroy. They did not harm. Instead, they tested. A fallen wall became an obstacle course. A collapsed bridge became a trial of balance and courage. The colonists realized with growing dread and awe that every action of the Deathworlders was a test. They were seeing what humans were made of. Alara watched as farmers leaped across jagged rocks, engineers lifted enormous stones, and children scrambled through tunnels without fear. Even the weakest colonists were learning, adapting, surviving under pressure that would have crushed them before. "They want us to prove ourselves," she murmured, awestruck. They don't want to kill us. They want to see if we can survive." The Deathworlders did not speak as humans did. No words, no gestures of friendliness, no smiles. Yet their presence communicated more than any words could. Humans had never felt judged by life itself, but that is exactly what this was. They were being measured, their courage, their intelligence, their persistence weighed against the alien standard of survival. Some colonists wept quietly, not from fear but from understanding. For the first time in weeks, they realized that this planet, which had threatened to kill them, was offering them something they had never received, a chance to rise, to become stronger, to prove that humans were not weak. Alara approached the lead Deathworlder. Its massive head turned toward her, glowing eyes piercing through the dust and wind. She could see the raw intelligence there, and despite the fear, she felt a spark of connection. "We're ready," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We will survive." The Deathworlder did not nod, but something in the tilt of its head suggested acknowledgement. It would judge them, yes, but it also offered the chance to endure. That night, the colony huddled together under the alien ships. Fires burned in the open fields. Children slept with their parents, and Alara stood guard, listening to the alien movements in the distance. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, humans on Arendor 7 were not merely trying to survive a hostile planet. They were being forged into something greater, tested by beings who had thrived in worlds where only the strongest lived. And if they could pass this test, Perhaps humanity could endure anything. Outside, the wind whispered through the ruins, and the shadows of the Deathworlders stretched long across the land. The stars blinked faintly in the dark above, silent witnesses to the beginning of something extraordinary. Ilara closed her eyes, inhaling the cold night air. "We sent an SOS to the stars," she whispered. "And now, they have come. Whatever comes next, we will face it, together." Somewhere in the void, the Deathworlders waited, patient and relentless, and humanity, trembling but defiant, would have to rise or be destroyed. The next morning, the sky of Arendor 7 was strangely calm. The winds had slowed. The red glow of alien ships bathed the colony in a quiet light, and yet the humans knew better than to feel safe. The Deathworlders had arrived, but they had not offered comfort. They had offered a challenge. Commander Ilara Voss gathered the colonists in the main square. Faces were pale, eyes wide, and hands shook from exhaustion and fear. Children clung to their parents. Farmers gripped tools like weapons. Engineers clutched broken parts of machines, ready to defend their lives. "The Deathworlders are not here to destroy us." "Not yet," Ilara said, trying to steady her voice. "They are testing us. Every step we take, every choice we make will be measured. And if we fail, well, we cannot afford to think about failure. We survive, we endure, we adapt. That is our only choice." No one spoke. They understood the truth of her words. Survival on Arendor 7 had always been difficult, but now the challenge was more than the planet itself. The Deathworlders had set rules they did not explain, standards they did not reveal. Humans had to prove themselves worthy of life under alien judgment. The first trial came swiftly. The Deathworlders led the colonists to the cliffs that bordered the colony. Jagged rocks jutted out from sheer drops. The wind blew like knives, slicing at unprotected skin. And yet, the humans were expected to climb, balance, and leap across impossible gaps. Tessa, the little girl who always laughed at her mistakes, froze at the edge of the first chasm. She looked down at the jagged rocks far below. Panic gripped her chest. Ilara knelt beside her. "Listen to me," she said gently. "I know it's terrifying, but you are braver than you think. Take my hand and step." Tessa's fingers trembled as she gripped Ilara's. With a deep breath, she leapt. The wind screamed in her ears, but she landed safely on the next ledge. She looked back at her mother, eyes shining with pride. Around her, the other children followed, guided by courage they didn't know they had. Next came the predators. Massive horned creatures with scales as hard as metal lurked near the forest edge. The Deathworlders watched as humans learned to fight, evade, and survive. Weapons barely scratched the beasts, but strategy, quick thinking, and teamwork gave the colonists a chance. Ilara fought alongside farmers, engineers, and even children, improvising weapons from broken tools and rocks. Every life saved became a small victory. Every mistake a lesson burned into memory. The trials continued for days. Humans carried heavy stones across rough terrain, built shelters in impossible locations, and endured storms that tore the skin from bones. Every task was brutal, every moment a battle between fear and determination, and all the while the Deathworlders watched. They did not interfere, did not comfort, and did not praise. They simply measured, judged, and waited. Ilara began to notice something extraordinary. Humans who had once been timid were now sharper, faster, stronger. Farmers became hunters. Engineers became strategists. Children became agile and clever beyond their years. The trials were changing them. Every step, every leap, every strike was forging them into something new, something closer to the relentless, perfect beings who watched from the shadows. At night, the colonists huddled together under the alien ships. Fires burned in the open fields, shadows dancing across exhausted faces. Some whispered prayers, some whispered hopes, some whispered fears they could not share in the daylight. And still, the Deathworlders stood silently nearby, guardians of a test humans did not yet fully understand. Ilara looked at her people, feeling a swell of pride she had not known was possible. "We are being tested," she said softly to herself. "But we are surviving. We are learning. We are becoming something greater." For the first time since arriving on Arendor 7, she felt a flicker of hope that was not fragile or fleeting. It was strong, built from sweat, pain, and courage. Humans were capable of more than they had ever imagined. One morning, after weeks of trials, a young colonist approached Ilara. His hands were scarred, his clothes torn, and his eyes bright. "Commander," he said, voice shaking, "I think we can do this. We can survive anything if we stay together." Ilara smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly what they want us to see. Not just the planet, not just the predators. They want to see us. Who we are when nothing else protects us, and we are strong." Somewhere above the cliffs, the Deathworlders observed. Their glowing eyes reflected a deep, ancient intelligence. They had come to judge, to test, to measure humanity, but they had also done something unexpected. They had awakened a fire in the hearts of humans, a fire that no storm, predator, or alien threat could ever fully extinguish. The colonists slept that night with exhaustion weighing on their bodies, but courage filling their hearts. They had survived challenges no human had ever faced. They had faced fear and pain, hunger and danger, and they had endured. Ilara looked up at the alien ships glowing softly under the twin suns. "We sent an SOS to the stars," she whispered again. "And they came to see if we could rise, and rise we have." The winds of Arendor 7 carried her words across the colony, across the cliffs, across the forests where predators still lurked. Somewhere in the infinite darkness, beings who thrived on death and strength had witnessed humanity's will, and the humans had proven it was unbreakable. And so, the test of survival continued, but for the first time, the colonists were not afraid. They were ready. The trials had changed the colonists. Days of climbing cliffs, fighting predators, and enduring storms had hardened them, but it had also taught them courage they never knew existed. Even the children moved with quiet confidence, learning to watch, to think, to survive. The Deathworlders had not smiled or praised, yet their presence was a constant reminder that humans were being measured, and that they were rising to the challenge. Commander Ilara Voss watched her people as they moved through the shattered colony. She could see the difference in them, the way they carried themselves, the way their eyes scanned the horizon, alert for danger but also for opportunity. Humans were no longer just fragile creatures clinging to life. They were fighters, learners, and survivors. The Deathworlders began to take notice. One of the massive aliens approached a small group of colonists, its glowing eyes studying their movements. Instead of attack, it offered guidance. It showed them how to construct stronger shelters from the jagged rocks, how to sharpen their tools into deadly weapons, and even how to track the predators that once seemed unstoppable. Ilara watched in awe. Humans, who had once fled at the sight of these creatures, were now working alongside them. They were learning from the very beings they had feared. Some colonists began to mimic the Deathworlders' movements, their precision, their awareness of the environment. Step by step, humans were being forged into something more than themselves, something capable of surviving worlds that had always seemed impossible. It was not easy. Fear never fully left them. Nights were filled with distant roars, crashing trees, and the faint sound of predators moving just beyond the walls. Yet humans adapted. They shared knowledge, offered help to one another, and began forming trusts with the Deathworlders. A trust born not from friendship, but from mutual respect. Ilara herself learned from them. One evening, she followed a massive Deathworlder to a cliff overlooking the colony. The alien pointed its claw at the distant forests. Then, through movement and gestures, it showed her how to predict predator behavior, how to anticipate attacks, and how to defend without direct confrontation. The lesson was harsh, demanding, and unlike anything humans had experienced. But Ilara absorbed it, understanding that the Deathworlders were not cruel. They were teachers of survival in its most absolute form. The bond between human and alien grew slowly but undeniably. Colonists who had once cowered now walked alongside Deathworlders in patrols, learning to read the land and the creatures within it. Children played near the aliens, mimicking their movements, daring each other to perform tasks the adults could barely manage. The Deathworlders did not smile, but their presence was gentle in its own alien way. One night, Ilara gathered the colonists around the fire. Faces were soot-strewn, eeked, eyes bright with the pride of the day's survival. "Look at what we've become," she said softly. "We are no longer just humans struggling to live. We are learners, fighters, and survivors, and we are stronger because we did not give up." Some of the older colonists nodded silently. Some smiled, the first real smiles in weeks. Even the children listened intently, understanding in their own way that they were part of something greater than themselves. A soft rumble echoed in the distance. The Deathworlders were moving beyond the colony, patrolling, observing, silently ensuring that humans were keeping pace. Alara looked at them and felt a deep respect, tinged with awe. They had arrived as predators, judges, and aliens from a world of death and strength, yet they had also become mentors, guides, and catalysts for human growth. Alara thought of Tessa, the little girl who had once trembled at cliffs and predators. Now Tessa climbed, leapt, and observed with sharp, careful eyes. She had learned to face fear and survive it. Humans were no longer fragile. They were resilient, adaptive, and dangerous to anyone who underestimated them. As night fell, the twin suns disappeared below the horizon, and the colony settled under alien watch. Fires burned brightly, casting long shadows across the rough terrain. Humans slept in shifts, always alert, always learning, always surviving. The Deathworlders remained nearby, silent but ever present, a constant reminder that humans were being watched, tested, and transformed. Alara stared up at the glowing alien ships and whispered, "We came here thinking we were alone. But we were never alone, and now we are becoming more than we were meant to be." The winds of Arendor 7 carried her words across the colony. Somewhere in the infinite darkness of space, the stars seemed to shimmer in answer. Humans had survived, learned, and grown stronger. They had faced fear and pain, and in doing so earned the respect of beings born in worlds of death and fire. Tomorrow would bring new trials. Storms would rage, predators would hunt, and the Deathworlders would watch. But for the first time, humans were not afraid. They were ready to fight, endure, and rise together. In the quiet of the alien-lit night, Alara understood the truth. Survival was no longer just about staying alive. It was about becoming something greater, something the universe could not ignore. And for the first time, she believed that humans on Arendor 7 would not just survive, they would thrive. Arendor 7 had grown stronger. The colony, once fragile and terrified, now moved with purpose. Humans climbed cliffs, tracked predators, and defended their homes with courage they never knew they possessed. Under the silent guidance of the Deathworlders, they had become survivors, fighters, and learners. But peace is never eternal in the galaxy. Far beyond the outer rim, a raider fleet detected the colony. They had intercepted the SOS signal, misreading it as weakness. To the raiders, Arendor 7 was a prize, crystal-rich, lightly defended, and inhabited by what they assumed were helpless humans. The first warning came as distant flashes in the night sky. At first, colonists thought it was another storm or a meteor shower, but Alara's sharp eyes noticed the pattern. The formations were too deliberate, moving with precision and intent. "Raiders," she whispered, her jaw tight. "They've found us." Panic began to ripple through the colony. For weeks they had been building strength, learning from the Deathworlders and proving themselves against the planet itself. But this was different. These humans, or perhaps something more cunning, were coming to destroy them and take their crystals. Alara called a meeting in the main square. Children and adults alike gathered, faces tense, eyes wide. "We've survived storms, predators, and the tests of the Deathworlders," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Now we face enemies who think we are weak. But we are not weak. We are ready. We have learned. And we will fight." The Deathworlders observed silently, massive forms towering over the humans. Their glowing eyes scanned the horizon, analyzing the incoming fleet, studying strategies, and measuring the humans' readiness. They did not offer comfort. They did not give orders. But their presence alone impressed strength and courage into the hearts of the colonists. For the first time, humans worked as one unit, no longer scattered and afraid. Farmers who had never held weapons trained alongside engineers who had once tinkered only with machines. Children who had learned to dodge predators now helped set traps. Every human had a role. Every action mattered. When the raider ships entered the atmosphere, the colony was ready. Humans had built defenses, sharpened weapons, and learned to anticipate attacks, guided by alien precision and human ingenuity. The raiders swooped down, their ships cutting through the sky like metallic vultures. But the humans and their Deathworlder mentors were waiting. The first clash was brutal. Raiders fired their weapons, cutting through trees and metal alike. Humans returned fire using traps, barriers, and clever tactics taught by the Deathworlders. Predators of Arendor 7, once feared, now fought alongside humans in a strange, tense alliance. Every loss was mourned, every small victory celebrated. Alara fought on the front lines, moving with a combination of human instinct and the lessons of the Deathworlders. She watched as colonists she had known as timid, fearful, and unsure now charged into battle with courage and strategy. The Deathworlders moved among them, protecting, guiding, and silently approving. Hours turned into a grueling day of combat. Fire and smoke filled the skies. Raiders screamed in fury, their ships crashing into cliffs, into traps, and even into one another. Humans adapted quickly, improvising attacks, defending weak points, and using the terrain to their advantage. Every colonist understood that failure meant annihilation, yet none faltered. Alara found herself beside Tessa, the little girl who had once trembled at cliffs. Now Tessa stood on a small rise, firing a makeshift launcher at a raider ship. "I'm ready, Commander," she shouted. Alara felt her chest tighten with pride. Humanity had grown stronger because they had faced fear and refused to break. As night fell, the battle reached its climax. The raider fleet was powerful, but the colony's resilience, unity, and cunning proved greater. Humans and Deathworlders fought side by side, every move precise, every strike lethal. Slowly, the raiders were pushed back, their ships destroyed, their ranks scattered. When the dust finally settled, the colony lay in ruins, but victorious. Fire still burned, but humans were alive. Children clung to parents, exhausted but smiling. Adults wept quietly, overwhelmed by relief and pride. Alara stood at the center of it all, looking at the survivors and the silent Deathworlders. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived the impossible." The Deathworlders did not cheer. They did not smile. But their glowing eyes swept over the humans with what felt like approval. They had not interfered directly. They had allowed humans to prove themselves. And humans had passed the test with courage, strategy, and heart. Alara looked at the horizon, at the broken but unbeaten colony. "We are stronger than any storm, any predator, any enemy," she said softly. "And now we know that nothing in this galaxy can break us if we fight together." Somewhere in the void, the Deathworlders watched, patient and silent. But their eyes reflected a truth humans had earned. Arendor 7 was no longer a fragile colony. Humans were alive, capable, and dangerous to anyone who underestimated them. For the first time, the colonists slept without fear. They had endured the tests of the Deathworlders and the attack of the raiders. They had survived against all odds. And in their hearts they knew something extraordinary. Humanity had begun to claim its place in the galaxy. The dawn over Arendor 7 was quiet, almost peaceful. The raider fleet had been destroyed, their ships broken and scattered across the horizon. Smoke and fire still lingered, reminders of the battle that had tested the colony to its limits. But for the first time in weeks, humans could breathe without fear. Commander Alara Voss walked through the ruins, her heart swelling with pride. Every colonist she passed showed the same mixture of exhaustion, relief, and triumph. Farmers who had once trembled at shadows now carried weapons confidently. Engineers who had cowered behind walls were repairing structures with skill and speed. Children ran through the debris, their laughter cautious but bright, a sound that had once seemed impossible on this harsh planet. The Deathworlders stood silently on the cliffs, observing. Their glowing eyes followed every movement, noting how humans had adapted, how they had endured. They had come as predators, as judges, as creatures of unimaginable strength, and humans had faced them, learned from them, and now fought with a unity that rivaled the aliens themselves. Alara gathered her people in the central square. Fires burned around them, and the stars above twinkled faintly, witnessing the triumph. She raised her voice steady and strong. "Look at yourselves. Look at what we have become. We survived the storms, the predators, the trials of the Deathworlders, and the raiders who thought we were weak. And we are still here, together, stronger than ever." Tears glistened in her eyes as she spoke, and she saw the same pride reflected in the faces around her. Every colonist, no matter how small or timid, had fought, endured, and proven that humanity could rise to any challenge. The Deathworlders did not applaud. They did not speak, but there was a shift in their posture, a subtle acknowledgement that humans had passed the ultimate test. They had not interfered directly in the battle against the raiders, but their presence had pushed humans to fight smarter, stronger together. Alara walked among them, touching shoulders, clasping hands, offering words of encouragement. We survived because we did not fight alone. Every person here mattered. Every choice mattered. And every life mattered. That is why we are alive. Even the youngest children understood this now. Tessa, once trembling at cliffs and predators, stood proudly beside her mother holding a small repaired launcher. She had faced fear, pain, and danger and survived. Around her, other children shared similar stories of courage. As the day passed, the colonists began rebuilding. Walls were repaired, shelters rebuilt, and defenses strengthened. They moved with confidence, guided by lessons from the Deathworlders and experiences of the battle. Every action carried the knowledge that they were no longer helpless, that they were capable of surviving anything the galaxy could throw at them. Ilara watched as a Deathworlder approached a group of colonists. It showed them how to strengthen the walls of a shelter using native materials, how to reinforce traps for predators, and how to coordinate movements in battle. The humans absorbed the lessons quickly, their eyes bright with determination. What had begun as fear had transformed into respect, skill, and courage. That night, the colony gathered once more around the fires. Children slept with their parents nearby, exhausted but safe. Adults shared stories of the battle, of small acts of heroism that had turned the tide. And Ilara, standing slightly apart, gazed at the stars above. "We sent an SOS to the stars," she whispered to herself. "And they came, not just to test us, but to show us what we could become." The Deathworlders moved silently through the shadows, their glowing eyes reflecting the fires of the colony. They had judged humanity, challenged it, and now they had witnessed its strength. The humans had proven themselves worthy of survival, worthy of respect, and, perhaps most importantly, worthy of their own potential. Ilara felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. The storms would come again. The predators would return. The galaxy would continue to test them. But for the first time, she knew that humanity on Arendor 7 was ready. Not just to survive, but to thrive. The colony had endured, grown, and transformed. What had once been fear and despair had become courage, hope, and unity. Every scar on the land, every wound on the colonists' bodies was a reminder of the strength that could emerge from adversity. Ilara knelt by a small fire, placing her hand on the warm earth. She felt the life beneath it, the soil, the rocks, the pulse of the planet itself. Humans were no longer just survivors. They were guardians of their world, tempered by pain, guided by the Deathworlders, and united by trust in each other. Somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the stars waited. But now Ilara knew humanity had carved its place among them. They had fought, endured, and triumphed. And when the next challenge came, they would face it together. She looked at the faces of her people, tired, scarred, but shining with determination, and smiled. "We are alive. We are strong. And the galaxy will remember us." The twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the colony. Fires flickered and the wind whispered across the plains. And somewhere in the darkness, the Deathworlders watched, silent but satisfied. Humanity had survived. Humanity had risen. Humanity had triumphed through unity. Years had passed since the Raiders had been defeated, and the Deathworlders had returned to the void from which they had come. Arendor 7 was no longer a fragile colony clinging to life. It had become a stronghold, a symbol of human resilience and determination. Homes had been rebuilt, defenses strengthened, and the crystal mines pulsed with energy once more. But more than that, humanity had changed. Children ran freely through the forests, learning to track the predators that roamed the planet. Farmers had become hunters, engineers had become strategists, and the entire colony moved with confidence and purpose. The trials of the Deathworlders and the battles against the Raiders had forged something extraordinary. Humans had learned that fear could be overcome, and survival could be mastered. Commander Ilara Voss stood on the cliffs overlooking the colony, watching the sun rise over the rugged landscape. The wind whipped her hair, carrying the sounds of life, the laughter of children, the hum of machines, the quiet chatter of workers in the crystal mines. She smiled, feeling a deep pride that had taken years to grow. She thought back to the day they had sent the SOS to the stars, desperate and afraid. The galaxy had answered, but not with easy rescue. Instead, it had sent the Deathworlders, beings of unimaginable strength who had forced humanity to confront its limits. And humanity had risen. Ilara knelt by the edge of a crystal formation, touching its glowing surface. The crystals that had once been a source of hope and later of fear now felt like a heartbeat beneath the planet. Humans had endured storms, predators, alien judgment, and raiders. They had survived through courage, unity, and relentless determination. And now the pulse of the planet seemed to echo their triumph. The colony sent new transmissions into the stars. Not cries for help, but messages of strength. Humans had learned to fight, to endure, and to thrive in the harshest of worlds. Every message carried the proof that humanity had changed. They were no longer fragile beings at the mercy of the galaxy. They were survivors, warriors, and stewards of their world. Tessa, now older and confident, ran up the cliffs to join Alara. "Commander," she said, her eyes shining, "we've come so far. Look at them, all of us. We survived. We're alive." Alara placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the energy of a new generation that had never known fear the way she had. "Yes," she said softly, "and we will continue to survive, grow, and endure. This is just the beginning. Humanity will not be ignored in this galaxy." The twin suns rose fully, casting warm light over the colony. The forests swayed gently, predators prowled at a safe distance, and the once dangerous cliffs now served as training grounds and lookout points. Humans had turned the world that once threatened them into a home they could defend and cherish. Far above, in the endless dark, the Deathworlders watched from the edges of space. They did not intervene, they did not speak, but their eyes reflected a quiet satisfaction. The humans of Arendor 7 had passed their test, survived every challenge, and grown stronger than any being might have expected. They had proven their worth. Alara raised her arms to the sky, feeling the wind and the warmth of the suns. "We called to the stars," she whispered. They answered, and we answered back. We survived. We thrived. We are humanity. The colony gathered for the night, fires burning bright and steady. Stories of courage and triumph were shared, not just from the battle against the raiders, but from every trial the Deathworlders had imposed. Every colonist had a story of fear faced and overcome, of skills learned and courage discovered. And in each story, there was the heartbeat of a civilization that refused to die. Alara looked at the horizon, where the sky met the jagged mountains, and she felt the weight of everything humanity had endured. The SOS that had once seemed like a final plea had become a message of hope, strength, and legacy. Humanity had not just survived. They had become a force the galaxy could not ignore. And somewhere far across the stars, new eyes watched. Other civilizations would hear the story of Arendor 7. They would see humans as more than fragile creatures. They would see a species that had endured, adapted, and risen to meet challenges no one else could survive. A species that had learned to thrive even under the judgment of Deathworlders. Alara turned to Tessa and the other children, the next generation. "Remember this," she said. "We survived storms, predators, aliens, and enemies. But most importantly, we survived because we never gave up. Our story will live among the stars." The children nodded, eyes bright, understanding even in their young hearts that they were part of something greater. Humanity's story was no longer confined to a single world. It had begun to echo across the galaxy. As the night fell and the twin suns disappeared behind the mountains, Alara whispered once more to the stars, "We are here. We have survived. We will endure, and we will be remembered." The colony slept under the alien-lit sky, safe, proud, and alive. The galaxy had heard the call of humanity, and now humanity had written its legacy in the stars.